Welcome to Defenders of Craft, a Craft Pride podcast, bringing you the heart and soul of beer culture in Austin and around Texas. So this is Defenders of Craft, episode 8 now. Sitting down with Averie Swanson, head brewer at Jester King. And we're doing an event with you guys, and so we love to come out and talk to you about some of the cool things that you guys are going to be offering at the party. So let's go right into it. Let's start with Aurastone. Am I saying that correctly?
Yes. Yeah. Aurastone is a beer that we just released a few weeks back. It's a beer that started a couple years ago, actually. You know, we do several beers that have that we make using spent fruit. So we'll do like one primary re-fermentation with fruit, rack that beer off, and then we'll put like a fresh stainless steel beer on top. So we've done that a few times with raspberries and blueberries and cherries and such, but we hadn't tried doing it with stone fruit. So in 2016, that summer, while we were doing the apricot and the peach re-fermentations that we do, decided that it would be cool to do a secondary extraction of the fruit. So we did a small beer, a pretty heavy oat and spelt grist that we then racked on top of that spent fruit in the foeder and allowed maybe a week or two for that secondary extraction, and then racked that beer out into white wine barrels. We had some Sauv Blanc and some Chardonnay barrels from California that we filled with that beer. The beer itself took, because it was a smaller beer and it had quite a bit of yeast character to it, kind of an interesting fermentation profile. It took quite a while to mature in oak, so about 16 or 18 months into its maturation time. Was tasting through it and it tasted great. I decided it was finally time to rack it out. And I had a dessert at Emmer and Rye, which was just right around the corner from you guys, in December of last year. And this dessert was kind of like this peach and apricot, like ice cream thing that had this dusting of lime leaf and some pink sea salt, and it was awesome. It was interesting to me because, peaches were not in season at that time, but they had used kind of bumper crop from the year before that to create this ice cream and whatever. So, I don't know, it was a really awesome combination of flavors, and I remember trying it and thinking, like, this is delicious, and I would really love to try to recreate this in a beer. And kind of, jump forward to tasting these barrels. I remembered that dessert and was like, okay, I think that this would be a really perfect canvas for the finishing treatment that we ended up doing, which was the lime leaf and the salt.
Yeah, I really like that. I'm a sucker for lime, so I feel like this beer was made for me, and I read that it was actually packaged on my birthday.
Oh, wow.
So I was very excited. I was like, wow, they made a lime beer.
That's awesome.
And it's packaged on my birthday. I got to get some of that.
Yeah.
Is this the first time that you guys have done two fruits in the re-fermentation?
Yeah. So, we've done synthesis analogous, which is sherry barrel aged blend of the secondary raspberry and secondary blackberry. But they were separate barrels that we ended up blending together, the first iteration anyway. So this was the first time that we had done stone fruit, and the first time that we had decided to just from the get-go do two of them blended together. From
the start.
Mm-hmm.
That's a cool idea. So we're going to have also Demitone and Color 5.
Awesome.
What are the subtle differences that we're going to notice between those two beers? Because I've never had Demitone.
Okay. Yeah. So for me, especially this last batch, it was blend 2 of Demitone. So we've done that beer twice now. This one I think has it retained a little bit more of the blueberry flavor and a little bit more of the color. It has a little bit more intensity of flavor than the first batch did. So it's fairly similar to Color 5. Color 5 has a much more explicit sour character to it, whereas Demitone is lightly tart. So beyond that, I do feel like Demitone has a little bit more of an integrated flavor profile. It's not just like sour and fruit. It's a little bit more, integrated, for lack of a better word. And in my opinion, it's also a little bit more wine-like. It definitely has a little bit of like a natural wine kind of character to it. There's fullness of body. The tannic character from the blueberry skins contributes a little bit to a fairly bitter base beer. Just our Das Überkin in stainless. So
Did you guys learn anything from batch one to batch two that like made the beer more streamlined or better in some way?
Not necessarily. I remember after the first batch, thinking that it was the best secondary extraction that we'd done so far. I really liked Detritivore. Livy and Rose is a really nice beer. We're actually packaging that right now. But for me, the cherries and the blueberries, I think, have really shown through really nicely. The grape is also a secondary extraction that I've really enjoyed. I think for this year's demitone, we put a little bit less base beer on it. So I think that contributed to the slightly more intense flavor profile of this year's batch. But otherwise, it was basically the same process.
Nice. So, what can you tell me about this collab you guys did with Wander Flora? Did you guys do like the false pennyroyal and like source that from here around the area, and then they did Fontaflora did the nettle and the fennel?
No, so they actually brought. To be perfectly honest with you, I can't remember where the false pennyroyal came from. I think it did come from here. Todd came out, and him and our previous head brewer Garrett kind of walked the property and did some foraging and stuff like that. So the false pennyroyal came from here. They brought the nettle from North Carolina, and then Sean, one of our other brewers, had been growing the fennel in our garden. So he harvested some of the fennel out of our garden, and we added that. Yeah, that was a really interesting beer. It was one of the first times that we ever tried knocking out into the cool ship and using our immersion heat exchanger in the cool ship. So it was a facilitated cooling, which is different, for us than our spawn beers, which obviously don't use the heat exchanger, and we have to do those in the winter. So it has some of the character of the spawn beers in that it's a little funky and it's pretty tart. It has a pretty unique yeast profile to it, but it's not as funky. It's not as sour. It's definitely a little bit more mellow.
Have you guys done any other spontaneous style beers that also use the foraged ingredients, or is this kind of like the first foray into that?
Yes, we have. We did a beer with Scratch Brewing out of Ava, Illinois. They're some good friends of ours and really phenomenal beer makers. They came down in February of 2016, I believe, and we brewed a beer with them, and they brought a bunch of foraged ingredients from their property. They have a small brewery up in the woods up there, and they brought some spice bush and some dead leaves and some grapevines and a few other things, and we threw that into the cool ship, and that beer wound up having just this really insane yeast character and fermentation profile, and I think it's definitely one of the most unique beers we've probably ever made.
That's pretty cool. I like this idea of using foraged ingredients because obviously terroir is a big part of what you guys do here. So it's nice to see that come through executed in a beer that really encapsulates that concept. So you guys just bought this whole ranch, right? Sayers Ranch, not that long ago?
Yeah.
And so from what I understand, most of it is going to be a preservation space, just here to be natural and wild, to protect the microflora of your brewing region. How has that affected people's perception of what's going on out here, or other things in the brewery that people didn't think about before that went down?
Yeah. So 3 years ago, we were able to purchase about 58 acres. So every if you stand on the patio up at the brewery, everything that you would see would have been our property, with the exception of Stanley's, the farmhouse pizza place. So earlier this year, when we closed on the rest of the ranch, we also inherited the pizza place and an event center back behind the tree line over there. So we now have, I want to say it's around 167 acres, something like that. So I think it's been an interesting conversation to have with people in the industry and people that come out here to the brewery. There's so many people that ask us, well, why can't I find your beer? I would really, are you guys expanding? When are you going to start making more beer? Are you getting more tanks? All of these other breweries are going this route with their expansions and their growth. And it's always an interesting conversation to say, well, actually, we've decided not to expand our production right now. We make around 2,000 U.S. barrels a year, which is fairly small in the grand scheme of things, and we're able to sell quite a bit of it here at the brewery and sustain ourselves here. We're able to send a portion of that to events around the world so that we can share a beer with people. But we really don't have any desire to see our beers sitting on shelves in corner stores in Kansas or Georgia or whatever. So for us, expanding in that way wasn't really what we wanted. But that being said, we want to expand. We want to continue to grow this business and this company and this culture. And the opportunity was given to us to purchase the rest of the ranch, and we thought that we would be remiss to not take up that opportunity. It's been really great to kind of communicate with the folks that are out here in Dripping Springs and in Austin that come out here and visit us, because there are a lot of people that would come to Stanley's and not really know about Jester King or have any idea about what kind of beer we make or what we stand for within the industry. So getting to kind of tell that story to folks on our own property all over again is a pretty cool experience. I think people out here definitely appreciate that we're trying to preserve the land and the ambiance out here. It's Austin is encroaching on the surrounding hill country, and Texas is an awesome place, and lots of people want to move here. So we didn't want this beautiful property to be turned into a subdivision.
Yeah, that would be a real shame.
Yeah.
So you said you guys inherited an event space back there. It's behind the tree line.
Mm-hmm.
Any ideas about what you'll use that for, or like make it like a more part of like Swansea Day maybe, or
potentially? Yeah, maybe. So yeah, it's back behind the tree line. It's really beautiful, kind of open air assembly hall, similar to this, a little bit smaller, a little bit nicer. It has been used for weddings and rehearsals and receptions and things like that in the past. With the acquisition, we've been trying to integrate this business into our daily operations as a whole, and the event center is definitely high on our list of priorities to get up and running, but at the moment we're not currently accepting bookings for it. But the plan is to eventually have that space for people that want to come out and do private events, whether it be weddings or receptions or meetings or corporate events or whatever. It's definitely a unique spot, and we're looking forward to being able to share our beer with folks that want to come out here and have their parties. So,
have you guys made any progress with your Method Goose certification mark?
So we ended up abandoning the Method Goose trademark. It was originally something that we wanted to kind of create so that consumers and other beer makers are informed about the product that they're purchasing when they buy one of our bottles. Obviously, we are not making lambic because lambic is a protected thing and it is very specific to a region in Belgium. And we never claimed to be making lambic. But that being said, the beers that we were making, our 3-year blends, were made in the same kind of vein, in the same tradition as true Belgian goose. So in calling it Method Goose in the beginning, it really was an homage to the people and the product and the tradition that had come before us. We were not trying to co-opt that. And without going into crazy detail about the aftermath of that, we met with Heral. They communicated to us their misgivings and their concern about it, and we totally understand all of that. And we're not trying to upset anybody. We're trying to do the right thing by the beers that we make and the beers that other people make, and by the consumers that enjoy these beers. So through talks with them, we decided that Methode Traditionnelle would be a more appropriate term, and so that is what we have moved forward with using. That being said, it all comes from a good place. I think that our original intent was very much to educate consumers and to educate other beer makers and to have a succinct way of communicating what went into the production of that product. There's a lot of beer on the market. There's a lot of sour beer on the market. There's a lot of wild beer, and this lexicon that we're using as industry professionals isn't entirely precise all the time. So yes, you can make a sour beer. Yes, you can make a spontaneous beer. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's good. It doesn't necessarily mean that you followed all of these different practices. So how do you communicate that in so many words where you're able to maintain the attention of the person you're talking to? And that was kind of what we were hoping to achieve with this mark. And there have been a lot of good things that have come about from this discussion, for sure. A lot of sour beer makers have kind of banded together, and we recognize that there is a need for education and a need for communication amongst each other and with our, our patrons and the people that enjoy our beer. So it's been constructive.
Nice. So where do you guys get new ideas for beers and coming up with new processes and ingredients to use in your beers here?
So I would say that most of the beers that we're making, most of the new beers that we're making these days are inspired by food that we eat, or cocktails that we're drinking. A lot of times it is inspired by the things that we have available to us. So part of the farmhouse philosophy for me anyway, as I define it, and granted everybody that makes a farmhouse beer probably has a different definition of what that means. For me, farmhouse, there's absolutely an element of doing what you can with what you have. So if we walk the property and we see that there's tons of like poor man's pepper growing, which we haven't actually used in a beer yet, that's something that really kind of sparks a series of thoughts in my mind. Like, okay, well, this is a tasty, kind of super spicy weed that grows along the trails here. It's part of the mustard family, and it leads me down, like, what do I like mustard on? How do I typically eat something like that? Where does that flavor profile show up otherwise? So that's
Do you feel like with your growing reputation here as a brewery and all, that the expectation for those experimentations to be, like, awesome has just built over time? Like, what's that kind of pressure like to...
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I would say that there is pressure there, and it's, I don't know, for me, honestly, I've never really considered myself to be a super creative person. I was always a math and science nerd, and always kind of, I can't draw for crap. I can't sculpt. I haven't really tried that hard, but I just don't. My aesthetic, my abilities within like the conventional art sphere are not very strong. So for me, like the creative part of this, a lot of times just kind of was a byproduct of being excited about figuring out logistical puzzles. Like, well, how can we add this to that tank? Or well, what if we added, this ingredient to that ingredient and made this out of it and then added that to a tank? Or it's very...
Well, clearly this sort of experimentation means that you didn't just wake up one day being awesome at brewing the beer.
Yeah, no, it's taken work.
So along that path, what would you say has been just the worst absolute failure? Does anything stick out to you? I mean, there have been too many successes to count at this point, I feel. But anything that you were like, that is just the most god-awful concoction I have ever created? That...
Oh, man. I would say most of those don't make it outside the brewery. Thankfully, I think I'm definitely our worst critic, and if things aren't really up to snuff, we repurpose them or figure out something else that we can do with it. Or, we're good friends with the folks down at Revolution Spirits, and we can take beer that we don't like and they can distill it for us. So, we don't necessarily have to water the plants with the bad experiments, though that's not the worst case scenario anyway. But yeah, I don't know. I've definitely had some bad ideas. There was one thing that we did. It was in collaboration with a brewery in Moscow. We had brewed with them at their brewery there, and they came back down, and we decided that we wanted to do this kind of traditional Chuvashian farmhouse ale. And Chuvash, my understanding is that this is a region in Russia, and they grow hops there and whatever. But the way that they make this beer is that they basically bake the mash in these like urns in the ground overnight, and then they achieve conversion that way, and then the next day they finish their brew, and they use a hop tea instead of actually throwing their hops into the boil, and there are a few other nuances there. But so we're leading up to this collaboration, and I remember one of our engineers was like, "So have you built these korchagas? This is the urn that we were planning on putting in the ground and baking this mash. How's that going?" And he was like, "Yeah, we haven't gotten that going yet." I was like, "Well, they're going to be here next week, so we need these korchagas." And we're kind of brainstorming, and I was like, what if, and this is a terrible idea, and I acknowledged that in the very beginning, this is a terrible idea, but what if we use the cool ship in like the opposite way that we typically do. Like, what if we use it as like a heating vessel? So we mashed into the cool ship. Fucking terrible idea. And I was so glad that Sean wasn't there the next day to help clean us up because, or to help us clean, because it was, I was like, he would just absolutely hate me for this idea. And so we mashed in. We had the heat exchanger in there, and our plan was to run warm water or hot water through the heat exchanger in order to maintain, 155, 160 degree Fahrenheit through the night. And this is in our barrel room that we try to maintain at 100 or at 64 degrees Fahrenheit all year round. So very much working against ourselves in this very silly, very stupid idea. But I remember the engineer was like, "This is brilliant. Great idea. We haven't tried this before. I don't have to build this Corchaga. It'll be great." And yeah, we ended up I still have the spear sitting in oak. Because I do believe strongly that oak heals a lot of wounds, and blending is like the savior. So I still have it in oak in there, and the last time I tasted it, it wasn't as bad as it was in the beginning. So it's coming around. It's been maybe a year since it's been in oak, but yeah, we'll figure something out to do with that for sure.
None of that brewing technique or
no, I wouldn't
hot
recommend
teas
that.
kind of carried over for
no,
you.
I wouldn't recommend doing that to anyone. I wouldn't wish that cleanup situation on my worst enemy. That was a good time.
I like that the biggest failure is actually still not a bad beer.
Yeah. Yeah, logistically it was a total nightmare. But yeah. Yeah, I mean, we've definitely dumped beer. There have been a few batches of like spontaneous beer that we kept for as long as we could. We kept a long time, actually, like maybe 3 or 4 years, just to see what would happen with time and how it would turn around. Time is the healer of all wounds, and I think, it was a great learning experience. We did end up dumping quite a bit of it last season because we needed the barrels in order to, do our brews this last year, and our cleaning protocol is strong enough to where I don't think that we will have an issue with like the bad beer and the barrel being bad. But yeah, I mean, we sent some of it over to Revolution and they distilled it, and it's kind of like a Oda Spawn kind of Jester King, spirit, which is pretty cool. And then the rest of it, we did send out to the compost pile, and we're able to, put it on the plants and stuff like that. So, yeah, I mean, beer definitely gets dumped.
Well, it kind of brings it full circle, really,
Yeah.
like you using your brewery to feed your plants, which you then take ingredients from and brew more beer with.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's the circle
Circle
of life.
yeah.
Got to nourish the microbiome.
Yeah,
there.
exactly. And sacrifice to the beer gods, and the property gods.
That's the ultimate of like pour one out for your homie.
Exactly.
Like, let's just drop a whole
Exactly.
tank. Let's see what happens.
Yeah.
So August 11th, that's our date. Thank you guys for making it happen for us. I know we kind of went back and forth on this. It was supposed to be in April originally. I planned this for like my birthday party. I was going to have my birthday party at Craft Pride. Like, well, we're going to throw a Jester King tap takeover, so I have something to drink. But we didn't make it for April, but I'm glad we waited because we got an excellent lineup of beers, and I'm very excited to have 7 Jester King beers on the Craft Pride wall just for a random weekend in August.
Yeah, we're really excited about it too. I mean, Craft Pride's been a big supporter of ours for a long time, and we've always appreciated you guys, and I think it's amazing what you guys are doing for craft beer in Texas, and the service has always been really great, and you guys take care of beers. I know for the longest time, back when we were still doing casks, there were like 2 accounts in town that I was willing to fill casks for because I knew that you guys took, and you guys were one of them, obviously, because I knew you guys took such great care of the beer. You cared about how it was being served, and I think you guys are, exemplary professionals within our industry. So I'm grateful that you guys want to have our beer on.
Yeah, it's a good relationship, and I hope that we can keep it this way for many years to come.
Yeah, definitely.
Is anybody going to make it from the brewery out to Craft Pride?
Yeah, definitely. We'll definitely have Anne Claire, brewer, who is one of our tasting room assistant managers. She's our beer buyer as well, and she's big supporters of you guys. So she'll be out there. And I know I've had maybe 3 or 4 other people reach out to me saying that they're really excited about representing at the brewery. We should have at least one of our brewers there. I'm not sure if I'm going to make it. I think I'm going to be out of town on the 11th, but I'll I'll come by and drink what's left over when I get home.
Yeah, that's the thing is that like when you that's the good part is that, you know, to make our margins, these beers end up being a little pricier. Obviously, far pricier than if you come here, but we're saving you the trip.
Yeah.
And so as a result, for like the next week or two, we end up with just like an amazing tap wall of like beers that you can't really get anywhere
Yeah.
else. So
I also
we're very
feel like
excited about
whenever
that.
we have one or more Jester King taps on the wall, that the entire rest of the year, if there's, you know, any given time we don't, people come in constantly asking
Yeah.
if we have any Jester King. And then when it's there, it's like they can't process that through their mind. That's like, that's no way that's Jester King.
Yeah.
I'm not even going to ask. And like the logo up on the wall, they don't recognize it because they're something.
Not used to
something,
seeing it in the
yeah,
wild.
Exactly. Something tells them like, no, that's not what that is. Order
Yeah.
something else. And it is the weirdest phenomenon. I always feel like I should be just fighting people
Maybe
off.
we need neon signs. Something flashy. Yeah.
Well, I was thinking about making
Jester King. It's here right now.
Yeah.
like a little yeah, that'd be amazing. Just like a sign that's your logo, and then like you turn the bottom part on,
Yeah.
kind of like a vacancy sign, like
Yeah.
on draft.
Oh, that's amazing.
Now pouring.
Yeah. No, we should. Yeah. Actually, I think that's a great idea. Hopefully, Cockerel's listening.
Yeah.